Welcome back. Last week, I suggested that it's vital, before doing anything, to first get clear on what you actually want from your business. To ponder deeply the actual real numbers that you need or want, not the fantasy ones. Then, perhaps most importantly, what you are prepared in reality to trade off to get yourself there. I call these the sacrifices involved in success. I'll say that again. Success involves sacrifice. So if you're listening to this episode and you haven't consumed last week's, then I'd suggest you do that for context. Too many times in my life, I've had a conversation with someone keen to break free of the shackles of salaried employment. Let me show you how this conversation typically plays out. I'll call them Entrepreneur. Entrepreneur, hey Josh, I'm keen to make my side gig my full-time thing / start a business. Can you give me some insight on how to move ahead? Sure. What are you trying to achieve? Entrepreneur, well, I have an amazing idea for a new swipe app. It's like Tinder for the over 60s. I want to enable grey power to get back into the dating game. Me, in my head, wowzers. Okay, that aside, what do you personally want to achieve? Entrepreneur. Well, to get Granddad lucky again. Right, I get that. But I mean you. What are you personally trying to achieve? Entrepreneur. Market domination through first mover advantage. Me. Here we go again. Most people can't answer that question clearly. They're so focused on their idea, the app, the product, the service, that they often never really think about what they personally want to get out of it. And that is a massive problem. Because if you're unclear on what game you're playing, you'll end up playing someone else's and quite possibly losing. Look, it's never been easier to start a business. We're at a point in history where almost everything is digital. There's an abundance of capital available for those that choose to create intellectual property, and information on the how-tos, like what we're discussing right now, is prolific and basically freely available. The flip side? It's never been more competitive. Like when I started my first company, Potentia, I picked that name as it represented empower or power in Latin. The naming space was wide open. Fast forward to today, when you go searching, there's about 15 to 16 Potentias on LinkedIn alone. That's just one very simple example of the highly competitive landscape in which we operate today. But that's why I love the idea of clearly understanding the various levels you can play at, the associated returns, and the risks at each level. All of this is why I've created the 5 levels of foundership. I've seen people start what they think is a simple side hustle and accidentally build themselves into an operator's prison. I've watched others chase the exhausting entrepreneur dream when all they really wanted was flexibility and an extra income. The business you build needs to match what you actually want from life and are prepared to trade off to get there. Not what sounds impressive, not what your mate did, what you want. So, in my experience, all business owners fall into one of 5 categories: the lifestyler, the solopreneur, the operator, the owner, or the entrepreneur. They're all equally valid, but one of them will be the best fit for you, even if it's just for a season. And like seasons, it can change. It's very dependent on your life situation, your capacity, and your age and stage. Get it wrong, and you'll potentially build something that you hate, like I did with Amber. Get it right, and the business becomes a vehicle for the life you actually want, and will not make you a slave to the machine. So let me walk you through each one as I see them. Number 1, the lifestyler, which is also known as the side hustle. Since time immemorial, we've operated businesses from our home, our tent, or our cave. Known colloquially as the cottage industry, it's the opportunity for people to indulge in a passion or just to make an extra buck. This, I'd suggest, is the simplest form of business, and for many, it's really a wonderful place to start. The risks, they're minimal because it's likely on the side of a personal or a partner's regular income, so your household isn't dependent on it. Plus, the fixed expense base will be minimal. And as the name suggests, it's just that, a side thing, like a side salad to the main course, which will likely be your job. The time commitment should be 1 to 15 hours of your week, so flexibility is really the key. The side hustle should fit around your life, not the other way around. The pursuit will likely be part profit and part passion, and it's highly likely to just be you in the business. Take Kaz Staples, who founded Pure Delish. She started baking Christmas cakes in her kitchen for weekend markets, just testing whether people would buy her clean, delicious, and quite expensive creations. She kept her day job, and she worked on it when she felt like it. She slowly built up a small base of loyal customers who loved what she was making. There was minimal pressure, most of the time, and she was seeing if there was really something that could have been there. Kaz could have stayed at that level, potentially forever, and maybe even been perfectly happy. But she discovered she was fulfilling a genuine need, and more importantly, she'd learned how to run a profitable business whilst keeping her sanity. That foundation she built as a lifestyler eventually became the base for what turned into an 8-figure exit. Now, the biggest trap I see lifestylers falling into is accidentally letting it become their main thing without making that conscious decision. You start with weekend markets, then someone wants custom orders, then bam, you're working every night of the week and stressing about delivery deadlines. Suddenly your side salad becomes the main course and you never really made that conscious leap. This path works best if you're testing an idea, you'd like some extra income, you want a creative outlet, or you're just not ready to bet the farm on something yet. Watch for those warning signs though. If you're consistently working 25 plus hours a week, turning down social events or lying awake thinking about it, you've possibly accidentally built something bigger. Could be time to scale it back or consciously choose to move up to the next level. Hey legend, thanks for your ears. I really appreciate you listening to the show. Everything improves through feedback. I'd be really grateful if you could head to my website, joshcomrie.com, just click on the podcast link and fill out a 2-minute survey, which will give me the insights around the things that you're enjoying about the show and where you would like us to go more into the future. It'll take less than 2 minutes. I'd be really grateful. And you'll also receive some free resources should you share your email address with us. Thanks so much and enjoy the rest of the show. And that next level is the solopreneur, also known as a gig worker. The great reset of 2020, also known as COVID, offered us a chance to get really clear on what was important to us as individuals. It turned out that life didn't need to revolve around commuting, work, living in urban environments, and being stuck in the rat race. You see, the main problem with the rat race is if you win, you're still a rat. In the background in COVID, the war for talent became a widely acknowledged phenomenon. A scarcity of resources, coupled with a change in people's values, created a vacuum that was ready for a solution. Enter the solopreneur. Now, I reckon there's really 2 flavors of solopreneur. The first is the service provider, most likely a professional charging by the hour or by the day. The notion of one full-time employer gets replaced by a few or by many gigs. These tend to take the form of a day per week, a month, or sporadic work here or there, whatever works really. But it's with, ideally, a much higher hourly rate equivalent. For example, I've historically employed a CMO, Chief Marketing Officer, who spends half to 1 day a week at 4 to 6 different organizations. She brings strategy, planning, structure, and a deep subject matter knowledge on the analytics and how to apply that experience. Hiring someone for this level of experience would ordinarily be unaffordable for the company, so it offers a great dynamic solution for them. And for her, well, she has 3 months off per year for basically the same pay as her full-time salary. The second form is the IP builder. That's someone who's packaged their expertise into scalable assets. They might do some consulting, but they're also earning money from books, courses, speaking fees, or maybe licensing their methodology. Both paths are better suited to probably senior professionals who have built real expertise and probably a pretty good network. For the service provider, it's about bringing your experience to organisations just in snippets. They don't carry that full-time salary and get the flexibility. For the IP builder, it's about turning what you know into products and offerings that can earn whilst you sleep. For example, I know a leadership consultant who wrote a book about team dynamics, created an online course, and speaks at conferences. Same core expertise, but she's packaged it into products that earn while she sleeps. It's a different business model, but the same solopreneur flexibility. Now, the mistake that I see solopreneurs make is probably undercharging, especially those service providers in the early day. They think that because they're not full-time, they should perhaps charge less per hour. I say that's wrong. You should charge more because you're bringing flexibility and focused expertise without that committed overhead. Often a day per week can be as productive as 1.5 or 2 days per week when you remove all that downtime as well. The gotcha with the solopreneur, though, is if you find yourself wanting to build something bigger, to hire people, or you're constantly chasing new clients, you might be ready to move up to the owner level. The owner profile captures the bulk of micro and small businesses, and it's potentially what you think when someone says, "I own my own business." The reality here is that you're probably the centre of this business. It lives and it dies by you. In other words, you likely won't have a business if you're away for more than, say, a couple of weeks. I call this the wagon wheel concept. You're the hub, and your team, partners, suppliers, well, they're all the spokes. And like the wagon wheel, if you pull the hub out, it collapses. But before you go and get put off, these businesses, they can be immensely profitable. Just imagine everyone has a clear and definable role. You're directly exposed to most of the work and the customers, and the quality will be super high. The first services company I founded spent 2 years like this. I loved it, but I didn't have a holiday for the first 4 years. And it was a great business that was returning me up to $1 million of personal income per annum. And that was 15 years ago. But shit, it was tiring. The biggest trap owners fall into is thinking they can just hire someone to replace them without building the proper systems, analytics, and culture first. You can't just drop a manager into a business that revolves around you. It just doesn't work. I like this business if you want high income, enjoy being hands-on, and don't really mind being indispensable. But I'd suggest it's often a transitional business. The intensity drives you to scale back or to build in management layers. And there's a simple warning sign you should look out for. If you're making great money, but you feel trapped, or if the business has little sale value because it's so dependent on you, then you've probably hit the owner ceiling. And it's time to transition to operator or leap to entrepreneur. Now, as the operator, you'll probably feel like you're really living. The business is developing some real scale at a management level. You're hiring roles with some really fancy titles, things like CFO, CRO, CPO, and they'll be part of this storied group that's called the management team or similar. You'll hopefully be exploring an advisory board, and for business robustness, you'll probably have multiple offerings, multiple products, or service lines. Of course, with scale comes different niggles. Change, it'll be hard. Communication needs to be very considered and very structured. Plus, for both operators and owners, salaries are the number one cost. So cash flow, particularly the monthly revenue, will be an absolute fixation. The intention here for you is to not need to be there day to day, but likely month to month. Your mark will probably still be indelible at this level, so it's probably going to function best while you're around, at least for some of the time. At some stage, you may be about to bring on a general manager, a COO, or a chief of staff, the person who's not you, to potentially run the business, either partially or in totality. This, I'd suggest, is the single hardest hire you'll ever have to make. It's that person who is there to replace you. I do know multiple founders operating really well at this level, but also people that have gotten it wrong. One, for example, had a 12-month process to hire a CEO, then spent the next 2 years questioning every single decision that this management professional was making. It logically came to a head, and when in ultimate disagreement with the largest shareholder, that CEO had to go. One of my favourite expressions is, you don't buy a dog and then bark for it. If it's not clear, the biggest mistake that operators make at this level is trying to control everything through the management team instead of trusting them to operate. Micromanaging at this level kills the very systems that you've built. It also works at this level if you build something significant, you enjoy strategy over tactics, and can handle the complexity of managing and leading managers. You're no longer doing the work, but you're orchestrating the people who manage the people who do the work. But watch for this. If you find yourself constantly pulled back into operations, or if your management team can't function without daily input, you haven't actually built an operator-level business just yet. You're an owner pretending to be an operator. Other factors, your net profit should ideally have increased, while its percentage of revenue will have decreased. That's the trade-off for building something that can eventually function without you. Now, a lot of operators stay here. It's the sweet spot between meaningful income, business value, and personal sanity. But if you're already thinking about your exit strategy from day one, you might actually be an entrepreneur disguised as an operator. So let's talk about level 5, the entrepreneur. For many, this is the pinnacle of being a founder. And it's probably what most had in mind before they actually started a company and ran into the myriad of problems of staff, growth, and customers. If truly desired, it's highly likely to take some years to reach this place. But look, it's so worthy a pursuit. There are so many lessons I learnt while going through the owner to operator to entrepreneur journey. So I know how hard it can be to leapfrog straight to here. The exception may be the modern IP heavy capital raising business. Bootstrapped, you're just not going to be. The entrepreneur, they'll start with a very clear end in mind. They're a cog in the machine from the very outset, not the machine itself. They look for ways and for people to remove themselves from the business. They may not even work in it every day. The exit is long planned and there's great clarity on serving stakeholders. Take my mate JB, John Bolton, the founder and majority shareholder of Squirrel, a mortgage and personal lending platform innovator. He consciously made the decision and the gradual transition from one level to the next, which eventually led him to the bold decision to replace himself as CEO. Even more interesting, he chose someone who he used to personally report to earlier in his career. A bright move, as he was intimate with the working style, the fit, the values, and the other things that would denote someone's success or otherwise. The big decision JB made, however, was immediately he stepped off the management team and he didn't come to any of the meetings. That allowed his replacement to garner presence, build relationships, and bring his leadership style to bear without feeling like every decision or conversation was being scrutinised. Now that's what true entrepreneurs do. They build themselves out of the business. Contrasting this, however, is the biggest mistake entrepreneurs make by trying to be operators. They get seduced by the day-to-day and they get pulled back into meetings that they don't need to be a part of, and ultimately they lose sight of the actual exit. If you're an entrepreneur, but find yourself deep in operations, you, my friend, have probably lost the plot. The entrepreneur is not just building a business, they're building value for shareholders, including themselves. The warning signs are a little different here. If you're not thinking about an exit timeline, or if you can't articulate what makes your business valuable to buyers, or maybe you're micromanaging instead of building systems, you probably are an operator who thinks they're an entrepreneur. Done well, business value is maximised under this approach. Think about it. If you aren't the secret to the company's success, then it's something that potentially anyone could buy and run. It's not just value that's maximized, however. So is risk and probably stress. You'll have huge fixed expenses and quite conceivably share control with investors. This is the path for people who want to swing for the fences. Just make sure you're actually swinging, not standing in the batter's box talking about it. So there you have it, the 5 levels of foundership, from lifestyler to entrepreneur. Each one totally valid, each one requiring different sacrifices and offering different short-term and long-term returns. Here's what I'd suggest you do right now. Go back to those 2 fundamental questions from last week. What returns do you actually want? And what are you prepared to sacrifice? Then look at these 5 levels of foundership and ask yourself, which one actually gets me there? Don't pick the one that sounds impressive. Don't pick the one your mates choose. Pick the one that matches what you want your life to look like. The entrepreneurs, they may get most of the headlines, but some of the happiest founders I know are lifestylers who never wanted anything bigger. And some of the most miserable are entrepreneurs who should have stayed operators. Know your game, play your game, win your game. That's how you build something that serves your life instead of consuming it. Thanks for watching. Thanks so much for listening to the show. Your ears are really important to me. If you haven't already, why not check out joshcomrie.com. There's a bunch of free resources on there, a downloadable chapter of my upcoming book, 2 commas, a diagnostic to help you understand where your business may be at in relation to your exit journey. And why not feel free to drop me an email with any feedback that you could have. Any way I and any of us can improve is through feedback. Thanks again for listening.